England, a different story, heavy and in places prolonged showers pushing through during Tuesday night. But for Wales and the southwest, here also we'll see some wet weather pushing in after midnight. Now, with all the weather going on, temperatures holding up at 9 to 11 Celsius fairly widely across the UK. So not a chilly start to Wednesday, but it will be a damp start, even a wet start across parts of Wales, southwest England, and then that rain pushing into the Midlands, parts of northern England perhaps, as well as East Anglia, largely avoiding London and the southeast through much of the day, whilst northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland sees mainly sunny spells and showers. A gusty breeze for many, and it's going to feel much cooler under the rain in the south, 15, 16 Celsius. Could see 19 or 20 in the far southeast, but here we will see the rain eventually peel away during Wednesday evening. And then into the early hours of Thursday, actually, fairly widely clear skies. We'll see further showers into the north and west of Scotland, perhaps 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland, but otherwise under the clear skies, a cooler night to come. Temperatures mostly 6 to 9 Celsius as we wake up on Thursday. But Thursday starts off bright, a much more cheerful start to the day compared to Wednesday morning for England and Wales. Sunny spells continue here into the afternoon. 1 or 2 showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, not as many as we've seen during the last couple of days. And by the weekend, high pressure builds, bringing fine conditions for many.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The Prince of Wales standing in for Her Majesty, setting out the government's agenda for the coming year. We'll look at levelling up. What does it really mean, that phrase, levelling up, as well as energy security and the opportunities provided by Brexit. In the Brazier angle, I have my say on a commitment missing, you could argue, from our government's agenda today, an increase in defence spending. And if not Sir Keir Starmer, then who? We'll debate who could take the reins as leader of the Labour Party if Sir Keir is found to have broken COVID rules and steps down like he pledged to around about this time last night. But first, we've got the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. As you've been hearing, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government isn't doing enough to address the cost of living crisis, saying times are hard, but they're much harder than they should be. Well, MPs are currently still debating the Queen's speech delivered today, which sets out the government's legislative agenda. The government says they're prioritising the cost of living, with the Prime Minister acknowledging not everyone can be shielding from rising prices. Labour's Sir Keir Starmer says the Queen's speech was a thin address from a government that is out of touch.
This government's failure to grow the economy over a decade, combined with its inertia in the face of spiralling bills, means that we are staring down the barrel of something we haven't seen in decades, a stagflation crisis.
Well, the Prime Minister says the government will introduce laws the country needs to overcome the big issues of the day affecting families.
We need the legislative firepower to fix the underlying problems in energy supply, in housing, in infrastructure and in skills, which are driving up costs for families across the country. And this Queen's speech takes those issues head on. And above all, we're tackling the economic challenges with the best solution of all, and that's an ever-growing number of high-wage, high-skill jobs, Mr. Speaker. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And we drive up employment by creating the right platform for business to invest.
Well, it was Prince Charles who delivered the Queen's speech today for the very first time. Her Majesty missing the state opening of Parliament for the very first time in almost 60 years. Buckingham Palace saying Her Majesty has episodic mobility issues. Now, the Foreign Secretary says there is clear and shocking evidence Russia was behind a series of cyber attacks in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine. Liz Truss is promising severe consequences for Moscow over the deliberate and malicious incidents. British and US intelligence shows one of those attacks was on a communications company operating in Ukraine, Viasat, an hour before Russia invaded. It was aimed at the Ukrainian military but hit civilians in the country and wind farms in Central Europe as well. The United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is thousands higher than its official toll of 3,381. That comes after the major port city of Odessa was bombarded overnight by Russian missile strikes. The country's armed forces say at least one person has been killed and 5 more injured. And Ukraine's president is warning of global food shortages following the attack. The Prime Minister will travel to Sweden and Finland tomorrow as the two countries consider joining NATO. They're expected to make a decision about whether to apply before the end of this month. A spokesperson for Boris Johnson says the trip is about the broader security of Europe as well. And Boris Johnson says the situation surrounding the Northern Ireland Protocol is now very serious. He spoke with his Irish counterpart, Michael Martin, about the post-Brexit trading arrangements earlier on today. Mr Johnson said the recent elections had demonstrated the protocol was not sustainable in its current form. The Democratic Unionist Party says it will not join a new executive at Stormont unless the agreement has been altered. In news overseas, in Sri Lanka, at least 7 people have died and around 200 more have been injured following protests there. Thousands of protesters in the capital, Colombo, attacked government figures and set ablaze homes and shops that belong to politicians. That comes as the country faces what's been called the worst economic crisis in its history. The country's Prime Minister, Mahinda Rajapaksa, has resigned following the clashes. Colleen Rooney's lawyer says his client is appearing in court not because she wants to, but because she has to. That comes after the High Court was told Rebecca Vardy had no choice but to bring a libel claim against Mrs Rooney, dubbed Wagatha Christie, the case centring on a social media post by Mrs Rooney accusing Mrs Vardy of leaking false stories about her to the press. Mrs Vardy says she wants to establish her innocence and vindicate her reputation. You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now it's time for Brazier.
4:06. Today's Queen's speech was a chance for the government to put forward a fresh legislative programme, big ideas to move them beyond the rows over lockdown and those bad local election results. The package included 38 bills with levelling up, schools and energy security all featuring. The Prince of Wales stood in for the Queen at the ceremony itself to officially reopen Parliament after she withdrew because of what were described as mobility problems. Let's start with an overview from our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, who's in Westminster. Tom, welcome to you. Let's just focus actually on some of the political to and fro that followed the state opening. I can't remember seeing Boris Johnson looking quite so cock of the walk as he did this afternoon, but some interesting thoughts from Keir Starmer as well. He said this was a pretty thin legislative agenda.
He did, the leader of the opposition, really going in hard on the economic problems that this country and, to be fair, the European Union and the US are facing too. What the leader of the opposition called stagflation, which is a word that we haven't really heard as common parlance in our politics for many decades. Since the 1970s was the last time that people were seriously talking about damaging inflation coupled with very low or frankly non-existent growth. So yes, some really legitimate criticism there from the leader of the opposition, although not that many solutions from him in terms of what the leader of the opposition would do to stem that inflation or to boost that growth. Again, talking about his windfall tax, but not much beyond that. I do have to note that the chamber did seem pretty quiet during the leader of the opposition's speech. A number of MPs resorting to scrolling through their phones rather than listening, although the leader of the opposition did try and coin a new phrase that we need a government of the moment. His pitch, obviously, that he is the government in waiting, the government that would be a Prime Minister of the moment. The Prime Minister, however, retorted to that later in his address, saying that the leader of the opposition was actually the leader of the opposition of the moment. Clearly, a little nod there to the fact that the leader of the opposition may not be the leader of the opposition for much longer, depending on what Durham police have to say. Indeed, in the proposition of this Queen's speech, the loyal address that followed it, there were some lightly comical moments referencing the leader of the opposition's problems with Durham police. Indeed, those were addresses that were received with quite good humour from both sides of the House. Ultimately, though, this did seem like finally we were on to some substantive debate, listening to the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister talking about alternative programmes for government, far less about wine, cheese, curry and beer, and more about growth, about what we're going to do to look forward in the United Kingdom to a future that is more prosperous than it is at the moment. The Prime Minister acknowledging actually that there are some difficult years ahead, although saying that it's expected that the United Kingdom would be the fastest growing economy in the G7 by 2024. Some problems, however, before that time. It did seem like there was a lot of discussion with regard to the meat on the bones, because that is what this Queen's speech is all about. This Queen's speech is about the substantive programme for government for this parliamentary term. In many ways, this will be the last big opportunity that the government has to push forward substantive policies. The closer we get to a general election, the thinner these Queen's speeches tend to get, the more retail politics they tend to become, and the less substantive. This is probably the last big chance to carry forward something like planning reform, which was mentioned by Prince Charles in that speech. Probably the last big chance to do something meaningful when it comes to levelling up, rebalancing the economy. These big ideas that the government needs to get done if it's going to be a government that is to have a record at all. This is really the last mid-term moment for that to happen, and I think that is why things felt a little bit more substantial in the leader of the opposition and the Prime Minister's responses to the Queen's speech today.
Cheers, Tom. Thanks very much indeed. Scarlett Maguire is alongside me to ponder on this one. Substantive. Says Tom Harwood, said it repeatedly, in fact.
He did.
And it was, and it is. I mean, it's one of those big set-piece days.
I think it's substantive in the way that there are 38 bills. If you start looking at them, you do wonder what's going on. I mean, obviously, the big thing missing is what are they going to do about now? which is nothing. I mean, which we hear, I mean, the cost of living, which is a disaster for many people, a crisis for others. But I mean...
As elsewhere, in other parts of the world, most other parts of the world.
Well, yes, but it's particularly bad here. I mean, but what are we going to do about it? You know, I mean, we can say it's everywhere. When you can't pay your heating bills, when you're going to lose your home, what are we going to do about it? And answer came there none. And you know, interview after interview, people say, well, we'll deal with that in the autumn. How are people going to get through to the autumn? So that the first thing is the most important crisis hitting us just wasn't dealt with. But you look at levelling up. Well, what the problem...
No, you've teed it up beautifully. We've got a guest coming up who's going to explain what levelling up is. So thank you. But first, another piece of legislation put forward in the Queen's speech was the Energy Security Bill. It's aiming to make the UK low carbon in terms of energy usage, as well as reducing our dependence on gas in the long term. It's also going to extend the energy price cap to beyond 2023. Let's talk about this bill. Senior Research Fellow at the Centre for Energy Policy and Tech at Imperial College, long title. There is Malcolm Grimston. Malcolm, welcome to you. What did you make of the bits about energy in the Queen's speech?
We had the energy security strategy some weeks ago, and I think today was just a kind of staging post between that and the white paper that we're expecting on energy very soon.
Oh, that's gone. Malcolm Grimston. Oh, no, sorry, Malcolm. We're having problems squeezing the data down the tube. Carry on if you can.
Sorry, yeah. Yeah, I was just saying, it's really, today was a staging post between the energy security strategy that we got some weeks ago and the white paper that we're expecting. You mentioned the point on the price cap, which is for 2 or 3 years hence. Some talk about extra work on heat pumps, which is an interesting move. Like to see and could have helped the short-term problem.
No, Malcolm's gone. Let me just turn to Scarlett Maguire for her thoughts on energy. My next question, in a parallel universe where that just didn't happen, and I'm still talking to Malcolm.
Right.
my question was going to be, how easy is it to turn around these big departments of state when you see, as we have seen, something that they couldn't model into the bill, because it only happened in February, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, that's then got everybody, you and me, and everybody else scratching their heads about what we do about our energy supply and making us ponder on the possibility of things like fracking, going for nuclear, or is it the case that when you've got a big Department of State running energy, you know, you can't just turn that super tank around on a dime in a couple of months?
Well, actually, I think you can. I think that's their job. I mean, their job is. I mean, the Department of Energy should be about energy security. And given, frankly, Ukraine was not a surprise. I mean, we were all waiting for Ukraine for 3 months. I mean, I remember somebody saying...
No, Scarlett, people were surprised by the invasion, the actual invasion.
Well, a lot of people were saying the Russians won't invade until February, March because of the ice, because of the freezing. Right. But anyway, the point is that the energy security has been a problem for some time, right? And certainly rising energy bills because of the lack of energy security has been going on for many, many, many months. I mean, we've been expecting it since. I mean, we're now nearly coming up for a year. So what I think is actually we should have been looking at it, and it's like, you know, the white paper that came out left out the easiest way of saving energy, which was insulation. And so what we wonder is how we can go forward. I mean, and actually we have had an energy crisis. I mean, you know, the whole Green Deal for years and years and years. And we should have started building forward.
More nuclear power stations decades ago, including when Labour were in power, and certainly not decommissioning them as we now are.
Well, we also could have done an awful lot more about renewables. I mean, we could have been running on renewables by now. And Boris Johnson, wind, masses offshore wind, onshore wind. We'd have solar panels on all our houses. I mean, actually, that's what we should have been doing, because that way we don't have to rely on anybody else.
We're going to focus on something else briefly. Got you 2 penneth away there, Scarlett. And that's Brexit. Let's take a listen to part of the Queen's speech in which Prince Charles relayed government plans to deliver the benefits of leaving the European Union. This is what the Prince of Wales said.
Her Majesty's government will continue to seize the opportunities of the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union to support economic growth. Regulations on businesses will be repealed and reformed. A bill will enable law inherited from the European Union to be more easily amended. Public sector procurement will be simplified to provide new opportunities for small businesses. New legislation will strengthen the United Kingdom's financial services industry, ensuring that it continues to act in the interest of all people and communities. The United Kingdom's data protection regime will be reformed. Her Majesty's government will continue to champion international trade, delivering jobs across the country and growing the economy. Legislation will be introduced to enable the implementation of the United Kingdom's first new free trade agreements since leaving the European Union.
Big punctuation mark in the evolving story of Britain's royal family. We'll be talking to Robert Hardman, well-known royal author, about Prince Charles stepping up today as he did and what it means for the future of the monarchy. Scarlett Maguire was talking about levelling up a moment ago. What does it actually mean, she wondered. Let's talk about that. Levelling up, a phrase we've heard a lot about since the 2019 election, being as it is and was a key pledge for the Tories. Today, flesh on the bones, as the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill was announced. It contained plans to force landlords, for instance, to rent out unused shops, the revitalisation of high streets. Golly, we've talked about that a lot over the years, haven't we? Not very easy. As well as giving people more pride of place in their hometowns. Well, we'd all want to encourage that, wouldn't we? But how do you actually do it? The bills also had measures to reform planning laws to give local residents more say in developments in their area. Let's speak to an MP representing one of those areas that'll be hoping to benefit from levelling up. It's the Conservative MP for Dudley, Mike Wood. Mike Wood, thanks for your time. It reminds me a little bit of that phrase, big society levelling up. It's ever so slightly nebulous. What do you see it as meaning practically in your constituency?
Well, I mean, if you look at my constituency, in 1997, Dudley, the GVA per head in Dudley, the local economy, was about 84% of the national average. I think by 2010, it was down to 67%. Now, we're talking a bigger difference than there is between East and West Germany. So, I mean, the phrase the Prime Minister always uses is that we know that opportunity is spread evenly around the country. The talent is spread evenly around the country, but sadly, opportunity often isn't. So this levelling up is about making sure that wherever you live in the country, you should be able to have the opportunity to make the most of your talent, to fill your full potential without having to move to another part of the country, such as London or the South East.
Mike, what I mentioned in my introduction there, the idea of having more pride in your hometown, I mean, that's a very understandable desire, very human emotion. How do policymakers set about making that happen?
Well, it's about engaging communities more, and so obviously part of what's been announced today is around giving powers to local authorities to be able to make a difference in their area. That not all decisions do need to be made from Whitehall or Westminster. It's also about the things that you've referred to around what makes our town centres places you want to be rather than places you have to be. There's nothing more off-putting than a row of boarded up shops, and whether we can bring those back into use with community pop-up groups, other uses for those buildings, or for that matter, town centre living, it's a far, far better outcome than leaving them boarded up. And that's why some of those powers in that levelling up and regeneration bill that you're referring to are really overdue.
Mike Wood, appreciate your patience. I know we had some technical problems getting through to you, but thanks for your time. Thanks ever so much. Scarlett Maguire, reflecting on, do you now know what levelling up means?
Well,
are you clear on that?
I know what levelling up means. Yeah. If you talk to the people in the places like Dudley, the places where we need to level up, what they say they really want is for their children to be able to have jobs nearby. And actually, I agree about the shops, but they think it's about bringing manufacturing back. I mean, this bill doesn't even go near it. I mean, yes, it really matters about bringing shopping centres in the middle of town back. I mean, a lot of places where research has been done, they really mind because things like Marks and Spencer just move out of the area, and that's the end. But what this bill does, the problem with levelling up is the money's got to come from somewhere. I mean, levelling up isn't free. That's the problem. And this bill is nebulous. It says, oh yeah, we can do some planning, but it's not actually going to make a difference to people's lives.
I know things like M&S. You can't tell major retailers, the anchor stores as they call them, that they've got to stay. That's not the way it works in a free country. But you can create wealth. You can cut corporation tax. You can cut income tax, so that individuals who at the end of the day create wealth. The state doesn't create wealth, it just spends it. They actually set up businesses in those empty shops, for instance.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that's what it's not just about setting up a business in the. It's actually manufacturing. It's places where your children can go. I mean, if you read the stories about people who I mean, there's a wonderful book about the Red Wall by Deborah Mattinson, who did focus groups through them. I mean, it takes longer to travel into Manchester from somewhere like Bury than it would take me to go to Brighton from London. They're left behind because nobody's really thought through. I mean, transport is one of the really big things. Boris Johnson said he'd do buses. Nothing has happened. For many people, buses are everything. Nothing happens.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Scarlett, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, last week's local elections saw the nationalist Sinn Féin become the largest party in Northern Ireland's devolved assembly, causing the DUP to take a stand before forming a devolved government. It's put the post-Brexit trade agreement into doubt. The uncertainty addressed today in the Queen's speech with the Northern Ireland Troubles Bill. We'll discuss that with former Labour MP and independent peer in the House of Lords, Kate Hoey. Back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
I think they're still in the House of Commons talking about the Queen's speech. We're reacting to it here, and a government commitment to protecting the integrity of the whole UK and supporting the Belfast Agreement that was tabled. The assurance it comes at a time of uncertainty and the future of the Union after the Irish Republican Party, Sinn Féin, last week became the largest single party in Northern Ireland. Is the government doing enough to ensure the continued existence of the Union? Crikey, that's a question, isn't it? Let's talk about this with Baroness Kate Hoey, the independent peer and former Labour MP. Kate Hoey, welcome to you. Let's start on Northern Ireland. We were going to talk about it yesterday, but events got in the way, Keir Starmer and the Durham Beergate inquiry. It's in the minds of some people, this has really skipped on as a subject, Sinn Féin doing as well as they did. What say you?
Well, the elections were held. In many ways, very little changed. Yes, Sinn Féin are now officially can have the First Minister post because they got 29. They kept all their MLAs. They didn't lose any. And the Democratic Unionist Party lost 2. So the party that has the top gets the First Minister post. Of course, most people now are beginning to realise that the reality is nobody as the First Minister can do anything without the Deputy agreeing. You know, they literally cannot do anything without a unanimity between the two of them. But there was no doubt it was something that has upset a lot of people in Northern Ireland, that the unionist parties have been sort of split, and of course the DUP votes on the whole went to those who didn't vote DUP went to the more the stronger party on the protocol. That was the traditional unionist voice led by Jim Allister. But at the end of it all, I'm not sure we're going to have a devolved government for the Sinn Féin to be the First Minister, because until the protocol is going, the Democratic Unionists and the Unionists generally had a very strong commitment, particularly the DUP and the TUV, that they would not form a government again in Northern Ireland until the protocol was dealt with. They're fed up listening to promises, being told something's going to happen, recognition by the government that it's not working, but nothing happens. And indeed today in the Queen's speech, lots of things about legacy, lots of things about Irish language, nothing is concrete about the protocol. So Boris has to decide, does he want protocol or does he want devolution?
Just taking off your Stormont hat and putting on your Brexit hat, 7 of those 13 bills were related to Brexit, and they included things like giving ministers the power to effectively rewrite rules inherited from the EU without going to a parliamentary vote. There were also aspects of dealing with human rights law under a British Bill of Rights. It felt like a lot of unfinished Brexit business was being tied off in this Queen's speech.
Yes, and I very much welcome that. I mean, I think some of us have been, I know we had COVID and I know we've had other issues in Ukraine and all of that, but ultimately I don't think that the government has moved fast enough or radically enough to actually deliver what many of us who wanted to see us leave the European Union could happen. So some of these bills making it easier to get rid of some of the EU regulations that we've still got, because remember, we took over in order to make it easier, and because we had a parliament that was really trying very hard to stop Brexit, we incorporated all EU laws into our laws. So now we need the process of starting to get rid of them and to get rid of some of that bureaucracy and to be able to give business, the freedoms that maybe where they were in some ways stopped from having. So I welcome all those. Again, it's in the detail, what will happen. And I certainly welcome the human rights change, because frankly, I think, most of us were getting fed up with the way that we were being restricted from doing things that were in the interest of our country by human rights law that was not actually designed by us in the United Kingdom.
Kate Hoey, we're going to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks ever so much. MPs still debating the announcements from the Queen's speech today. We'll try and show you. Can we show you the footage of the chamber?
It's programme that I
very much... Theresa May, let's have a listen.
Will cement the government's commitment to enhance the provisions on supply chains. I understand the first element will be an extension of the requirements on supply chains to public procurement, to government departments. This is important. In 2019, as Prime Minister, I committed the government to use its power of public procurement to actually ensure that it was cleaning up supply chains.
Former Prime Minister Theresa May. I just want to ever so briefly turn to Scarlett Maguire to pay tribute to Theresa May. Lots of things that many of our viewers and listeners, myself included, don't agree with. I do like the fact a former Prime Minister has the humility to stand on the back benches. Not many do.
No, I completely agree. And actually, she doesn't sit there and sulk, even though Boris humiliated her over and over again as Prime Minister.
Arguably.
But what she does do is she comes in occasionally and makes really good things. And it sounds as though actually in this case that she's agreeing, that she's saying, yes, you've carried on something I'm really interested in. I mean, I have to say I have a great admiration for Theresa May. I mean, I think she is a woman of principle.
OK, well, there we'll leave it. But earlier, there was a focus on crime and a commitment to make streets safer. Over 13,500 new police officers have been recruited as part of the government's aim of having 20,000 more police on the beat. £17 billion of your taxpayers' cash has also been pledged to cut crime. Are these measures enough to make our streets safer? How do you even set about measuring that? Kevin Hurley is a former Detective Chief Superintendent at the Met and a regular contributor here. Kevin Hurley, welcome to you. Queen's speech, policing, money for police, where does it take us?
Well, the more money that goes into police, the better. But not only police, the criminal justice system. By that I mean the courts, prisons, probation, drug treatment and means of diverting people from crime, the better. What is interesting in the Queen's speech is the legislation that's being brought forward to make it easier to deal with those people who block the M25, glue themselves to public buildings and so on and disrupt everyone's journey to work. That's good news. Although some people might say it's curtailing the rights of some to protest, but there's a balance. In the end, we can't have everyone's lives being messed up. But more money is very welcome because the budget cut that police suffered resulted in a huge reduction in experience levels in the police. People left, they weren't replaced, people are still leaving. The drama we've got now is because police wages are effectively, as a result of inflation and so on, 25% less capable in terms of buying power from what they were 10 years ago. Our detective constables, detective sergeants, experienced police constables, and I'm not talking about the keen young boys and girls who rush around out there, but the people who actually know what to do and how to solve problems. They're all looking for ways out, and the people who are benefiting, believe it or not, are two specific groups. One of the railway companies taking lots of experienced police constables off to be train drivers because of their decision-making, the way in which they'll solve problems and their trustworthiness. And then, of course, the private sector, the banks, the financial companies and so on, are taking all our experienced detectives, particularly those trained in financial crime, because, of course, they are everything that they need. And, of course, in this day and age, when we want to go after the assets of organised criminals, Russian oligarchs, the last people the police should be losing are those. I mean, frankly, we're actually in a situation now where it's a perfect storm that's actually accelerating, and it's going to take some significant stuff, including changes in how the police are led, to pull us back to where we want the police to be.
OK, Kevin Hurley, got to leave it there, but appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, here's how we're going to spend your time debating who might take over should Keir Starmer lose the gig as leader of the Labour Party. First, latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you very much indeed. The headlines: the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says the government isn't doing enough to address the cost of living crisis. MPs are still debating the Queen's speech, which was delivered today, which set out the government's legislative agenda. The government says they're prioritising the cost of living, with the Prime Minister acknowledging not everyone can be shielded from rising prices. Labour's Keir Starmer says the Queen's speech was a thin address from a government that's out of touch.
This government's failure to grow the economy over a decade, combined with its inertia in the face of spiralling bills, means that we are staring down the barrel of something we haven't seen in decades: a stagflation crisis.
This Queen's speech takes those issues head on. And above all, we're tackling the economic challenges with the best solution of all, and that's an ever-growing number of high-wage, high-skill jobs, Mr. Speaker. Jobs, jobs, jobs.
Well, it was Prince Charles that delivered the Queen's speech today for the first time for him. Her Majesty missing the state opening of Parliament for the first time in almost 60 years. Buckingham Palace saying she has mobility issues. The United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is thousands higher than its official toll of 3,381. That comes after the major port city of Odessa was bombarded overnight by Russian missile strikes. Ukraine's president is warning of global food shortages following the attack. And Rebecca Vardy repeatedly denied leaking stories about Colin Rooney to the press while being cross-examined at the High Court today. Dubbed Wagatha Christie, the case centres on a post by Mrs Rooney on social media accusing Mrs Vardy of betraying her. The High Court's been told Rebecca Vardy had no choice but to bring a libel claim against Colin Rooney to clear her name. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, Colin Brazier's back after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, there are still Londoners alive who lived through an event so awful it's almost impossible to contemplate. It was on this day, or rather this night, 81 years ago, that death rained down from the skies above the capital in numbers that almost defy belief. 100,000 bombs. 100,000 bombs in one night. 100,000 bombs in one night. The 500 or so German planes that dropped them were not avoiding civilian casualties, they actively sought them, in fact. Such was Hitler's desire. It was the worst single night in what became known as the Blitz. By the morning, the death toll of men, women and children stood at 1,500 and counting. To give that some historical context, that's almost half the number of Ukrainian civilians killed so far by Putin's bombs and shells and missiles over the whole course of this year's Russian invasion. That number has been increasing rapidly recently. Famously, although Buckingham Palace suffered 9 direct hits, the King stayed in London throughout the Blitz. His daughter, our Queen, then a young teenager, would have heard the dreadful din of London being pulverised from the relative safety of Windsor, where she was sent for her safety and that of the succession. Today, the Queen is one of a dwindling band of World War II survivors who remember how it feels to fear, to really fear an invasion, to know what it's like to go to sleep every night wondering if you'll be woken by a cacophony of church bells, the signal that meant German troops were landing. Well, it's a poignant thought that our sovereign, having lived to see Britain defy the Nazi yoke, should now see her subjects menaced by another tyrant. It's a sad thought that today, for the first time in her long and glorious reign, she was not well enough to satisfy the act of constitutional theatre that lies at the heart of the monarch's role, because year after year the Queen's speech has been an annual reminder of Her Majesty's ability to rise above the party political fray. She announces policies and bills and initiatives, but we never get a clue, do we, about what she actually thinks of them. How often over the years did she return to the palace, kick off her shoes and turn to her late husband Philip and express what she really thought of her government? And given the significance of today's date, the anniversary of the worst day of the Blitz, I wonder, as she watched Prince Charles carry out her duties, whether she gave much thought of what some will think is a glaring omission in the new parliamentary programme, because amid all the promises there was no serious attempt to counter the biggest threat now facing Britain, not regional disparities or falling literacy, not waiting lists or carbon targets, but the bombs that another demagogue threatens to flatten London with. He won't be deterred by appeasement, just like the last one wasn't. Putin, like Hitler, lives in a world of brutal realities where weakness in an enemy is an opportunity for exploitation. He is a bully, and bullies are only repelled by those who are willing and able to stand up to them. Today, we should have heard that our government is serious about defending the realm, and that means raising the percentage of GDP that goes on doing so. When Princess Elizabeth became Queen, we spent about 10% of GDP on defence. Now it's 2%. And there are plausible figures, former generals and admirals, who know what they're talking about, who think that's about half of where it ought to be. If the Queen's remarkable reign teaches us anything, really, it's surely this, that her long life has given us a bridge into the past. We cannot remember, we may not even be able to imagine how the world really works when push comes to shove, when a dictator threatens your people with oblivion, but she does. Our Queen knows the meaning of personal and national sacrifice, which begs one key question, if you'll indulge me. What should we give up so that our armed forces have sufficient numbers to buy peace in our time? That's the Brazier angle. Scarlett Maguire alongside me to ponder on defence spending. Stephen Pound's come in as well. He won't be short of an opinion.
That was very sombre, and I think it's also very interesting, quite salutary, that I think yours was the only programme to actually mention VE Day. We're in... This is the anniversary of VE Day, or it was at the weekend, and I find it astonishing that no other platform actually mentioned that. So fair play to you for that.
Well, thank you.
And thank you also for not saying what was it like in the Blitz. I'm very, very grateful.
Wouldn't dream of.
Yeah, but what I do remember as a Londoner growing up in the 50s was the bomb sites. Everywhere. I'm a West London boy, but we played football. I mean, I thought football was a game you played on a bomb site. That was, with the Forsythia going around there and everything. And so it was still very much in the air at the time. And I think we forget this at our peril.
What your generation did do, Stephen Pound, was there were things like national service around. There was an idea that actually defence spending was a really big part of the cake that gets cut. And now it feels like almost a bit of an afterthought, doesn't it? I mean, Scarlett's welcome to contribute.
Well, I think one of the problems is, do we take it seriously or not? And we haven't taken it seriously, so we haven't...
And you say that as a Labour person. Well, you're both Labour people, but... Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what I'm saying is you can't suddenly just up defence spending. I mean, I do notice that we are sending millions and millions to Ukraine, right? Some money and actually an awful lot of tanks and things. But I mean, Is defence spending really what we should be doing to protect Britain, or should we be being smarter?
The key thing is what defence spending. When we were talking about national service, and I missed national service about a year, though I was quite keen to volunteer later on. It was about bodies on ships on the Lunenburg Heath. It's great, they wore a uniform, we wore a uniform. They would come towards us. They were the rules of law. Warfare nowadays is civilianised, it's asymmetric, and it's global. And back in 1999, I think, when we had the Strategic Defence Review, we came to the conclusion that great mass bodies of men and a few women on the Lunenburg Heath was not the way it was in the future. Basically, the Royal Marines, the Bootnecks, won the Strategic Defence Review. And we're talking... But Scarlett's touched on a really incredibly important point. To defend the nation in a time of aggression is one thing, but to prevent that aggression, to draw that poison in the first place... I mean, people used to say Britney Spears brought the Berlin Wall down. It was culture, and it was the West that actually brought the end of communism. And I think there is such a thing as soft power that we can work with. How that works with a brutal, lunatic, megalomaniac dictator like Putin, I don't know. But the one thing I'm actually draw some comfort from, some solace from, with this ghastly world of TikTok and YouTube and all that business, is that you can't keep secrets anymore. And there are people in Russia today who know that they're being led by a murderous, genocidal liar. And that's where your job suddenly becomes incredibly important, because people will be streaming you. And your comment that you've just made, somebody somewhere over there will be watching that.
And do you know the
no pressure.
No, thank you. Oh, we've said this before. He's got access to a smartphone as well. So this idea that you can be in an ivory tower cut off from how the world really thinks about you is for the birds. Stephen, we've booked you to talk about something else. I'm going to introduce the item now, so sit there patiently if you can do that. Can you?
Yes, of course.
Okay. So Keir Starmer, in the House of Commons for the Queen's Speech,
still with us,
said a day after promising to resign at this time yesterday as Labour leader, should he be fined for breaching lockdown rules at that alleged party in Durham. The odds of Sir Keir exiting his role as Labour's leader at some point between now and the end of the year, they've been cut today, as you'd expect, I suppose. Renewed speculation about who would replace him in the event of his resignation. Who might that be? Who would replace, potentially, Keir Starmer? The former Labour MP, Stephen Pound, and former Labour advisor, Scarlett Maguire, already introduced to you with that last topic. Who would... I mean, this is a massively hypothetical question, obviously. Who would get the gig for you?
I think you should go first.
I think it's going to be a woman. I'm absolutely convinced of that. And it's not because there's a paucity of candidates on one side or the other. And it's not just the fact that the majority of Labour MPs now are women, over 50%. But if you just have a look at the people who are in the frame, and it's obviously the people like Rachel Reeves, like Lisa Nandy, like Yvette Cooper, and then another generation, people like Roshana Alin Khan, who's, as you know, sort of mixed Polish, Pakistani heritage, A&E doctor, people like Rushanara Ali, and people like Lucy Powell. But for me, there's one absolute shining star in the new... You've got to think about, in the Vatican, they talk about, is somebody papabile? Is they capable of being the Pope? And you imagine these people. There's an MP called Bridget Phillipson, who's the Shadow Secretary of State for Education, used to be in the Treasury, used to work in a refuge for women in Sunderland. She's got the great advantage of being very serious, very sober, very intelligent, and coming from the northeast, and being a woman. And I think that is really what we need in the Labour Party. However, I'd like to say, Keir, if you're watching, don't go just yet, because I'm not being disloyal. I'm simply saying that should you be run over, by the 24 bus, Bridget Phillipson is more than capable.
The bookies agree with you up to this point. I mean, this is the Ladbrokes odds. They put Bridget Phillipson at 16-1, Yvette Cooper 14-1. I'm not going to go through them all, but the point is the favourite is not a woman. Who is it?
Wed Streeting.
No. He's second, 7-1. It's Andy Burnham.
Who doesn't want it?
Andy Burnham isn't even an MP. I mean, if Keir fell under a bus today, Andy Burnham wouldn't even be in the problem.
Obsessed with buses.
Yes.
Well, we're Londoners. It's what we do.
But the problem with this
Scarlet
betting,
bus, as we call them.
The problem with the betting, right, is they never understand the way the Labour Party works.
The Labour Party understands the way the Labour Party works.
Have to be.
Well, we can't tell you. It's confidential.
Yes, absolutely. You have to be an MP to stand. So actually, I do think Bridget Phillipson is remarkable. I think she's
not known
brilliant.
to the public, though.
No, because actually she doesn't go for the limelight. But she was on a media round this morning. She's doing quite a lot. She's really excellent shadow education. But I think she. I don't even know if she'd go for it, frankly. I think that Wes Streeting has been looking for it. He will never go up against Keir. There's absolutely no question. He's a total loyalist. But if there were to be a vacancy, Wes is really ready to move into it.
Have we learnt nothing from politics in the last few months? No. There's one lesson from the last few months, is that if you've not... You can tip somebody all you like, but until they're exposed to actual battle conditions, you've no idea. Rishi Sunak... And when he was exposed...
Well, von Clausewitz said every military plan survives only as long as the first contact with the enemy. And I think there's a point there. But I take your point. But isn't it interesting? The Tories are pushing David Frost. And if you have a look on social media, letters in the Telegraph, all over I thought, but he's dead. But it's the other David Frost. Although I have to say, to have a dead person... No, that's neither here nor there. But they are pushing... And one of the first rules of politics is the favourite falls at the fence.
But that's what everybody said about Boris Johnson, and look who our Prime Minister is.
That's what I'm going to cut him, because you two could go on like this for some time. Yeah, we've got a break. We've got to try and earn some money. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for coming in. You're with Colin Brazier on GBNews, on TV, online and on digital radio. Coming up after that break, it's a brand new feature for this show, 5 to 5. We'll be bringing you 5 stories. They're chatting off camera. 5 stories you need to know about on your way home. First, let's have a look at the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Compared with how we started the day in the south, sunny spells have now appeared and it'll be a fine end to the afternoon, but showers will continue in the north with the low pressure close to northern Scotland and perhaps some more prolonged rain as these weather fronts approach later on Tuesday. Here's the weather front that brought the cloud earlier, and behind it, sunny spells are expected for the rest of the afternoon and into the early evening. But for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, a different story. Heavy and in places prolonged showers pushing through during Tuesday night. But for Wales and the southwest, here also we'll see some wet weather pushing in after midnight. Now, with all the weather going on, temperatures holding up at 9 to 11 Celsius fairly widely across the UK. So not a chilly start to Wednesday, but it will be a damp start, even a wet start across parts of Wales, southwest England, and then that rain pushing into the Midlands, parts of northern England perhaps, as well as East Anglia, largely avoiding London and the southeast through much of the day, whilst northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland sees mainly sunny spells and showers. A gusty breeze for many, and it's going to feel much cooler under the rain in the south, 15, 16 Celsius. Could see 19 or 20 in the far southeast, but here we will see the rain eventually peel away during Wednesday evening. And then into the early hours of Thursday, actually fairly widely clear skies. We'll see further showers into the north and west of Scotland, perhaps 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland, but otherwise under the clear skies, a cooler night to come. Temperatures mostly 6 to 9 Celsius as we wake up on Thursday. But Thursday starts off bright, a much more cheerful start to the day compared to Wednesday morning for England and Wales. Sunny spells continue here into the afternoon. 1 or 2 showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, not as many as we've seen during the last couple of days. And by the weekend, high pressure builds, bringing fine conditions for many.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's time for 5 to 5. It's been 5 to 5 as we discuss 5 things you need to know before 5 o'clock. Today, we'll take a look at some of the other key headlines from the Queen's speech. Prince Charles stood in for Her Majesty and set out the government's agenda for the coming year. So at 5, the government vowed to protect the integrity of the UK's borders and ensure the safety of its people by taking strong action to prevent dangerous and illegal channel crossings and tackle illegal gangs who profit from them. 4, the National Security Bill will introduce measures to support the security services and help them protect the UK, with the government claiming it'll champion security around the world and continue to invest in in our armed forces. 3, there's a commitment to the success and integrity of the whole United Kingdom, prioritising support for the Good Friday Agreement and its institutions through legislation to address the legacy of the past. At 2, a crackdown on so-called guerrilla protests in the Public Order Bill. This includes harsher sentences as well as making new criminal offences for those who, for instance, glue themselves to roads or lock on to public transport infrastructure. Finally, at 1, there'll be investment in agricultural and scientific innovation in the UK. The Genetic Technology Bill will, it said, unlock the potential of new technologies to promote sustainable and efficient farming and food production. Say hello, it would seem, to gene editing. Those are the 5 things you might want to know more about before 5 o'clock this afternoon. Scarlett Maguire is alongside me to ponder on what came through in the Queen's speech today. There's lots of detail, 38 bills no less. We picked 5 there. What's really come across to you? What's the thing you take away?
Well, I suppose public protest is one of the ones. This seems such a small thing, whereas, I mean, as your policeman earlier said, what we really...
Not my policeman.
Sorry, the policeman that you interviewed, who knows an awful lot. And as he said, what they really need is more police on the beat, and they need it systemic because it's running out. And instead, we have a bill that actually that deals with minority. I mean, it's a tiny minority protest.
Well, is it? Let's see if we can talk to somebody who represents them. Oliver Rock is a spokesperson for one of those protest groups. Oliver, welcome to you. You speak for... You speak for Insulate Britain, and I'm sure they've got different spokespeople, but you're here to speak on their behalf. I think you've had a pretty rocky year in terms of your public profile, which is very high, but sympathy for your cause has often been undermined, I think a lot of people will feel, by the tactics which it would appear, according to the Queen's speech, are going to change, at least in terms of how they're policed.
I mean, yeah, it was kind of quite predictable that the government would introduce some legislation like this at some point.
What do you think it will change in terms of you going about your hitherto lawful protest? How do you expect it will change? Might you change your tactics as a consequence?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say we're kind of beyond protest at this point. We're in a state of civil disobedience, which means deliberately breaking the laws of the state. So we're not trying to do lawful protests. We're engaged in civil resistance because the government's failing us in terms of failing to reduce carbon emissions.
Oliver, what do you say to those people who, like the idea of lawful protest, but saw some of the images from last year, and you'd probably know what I'm going to say next, of, in one instance, an ambulance being stopped from getting to an emergency call, and just say that actually was deeply counterproductive?
Yeah, I feel like the last 30 years of peaceful protest has got us nowhere on this issue of the environment. And you can, peaceful holding a banner, going on an A to B march. It's been absolutely ignored, and carbon emissions have continued to rise.
What about all those... we haven't got time for this, I'm afraid. We'll try and continue this conversation some of the time. Oliver Rock from Insulate Britain, appreciate your time. It's 5 o'clock. Coming up, we'll bring you up to speed, we hope, on everything you need to know from today's Queen's speech. Prince Charles standing in for Her Majesty, setting out the government's agenda for the coming year. We'll look at levelling up, energy security and Brexit opportunities. The Higher Education Bill was also announced, aiming to place new legal duties on English universities to ensure free speech, that old chestnut, on campus. We'll discuss that with an advocate of free speech at the University of Cambridge before 6 o'clock. And would you welcome the UK joining a new European political community? The French President, Emmanuel Macron, has invited the UK to join a European Union spin-off. We'll debate that shortly, but first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top stories this hour. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says the government isn't doing enough to address the cost of living crisis, saying times are hard, but they're much harder than they should be. MPs are currently debating the Queen's speech, which was delivered today, setting out the government's legislative agenda. The government say they're prioritising the cost of living, with the Prime Minister acknowledging not everyone can be shielded from rising prices. Well, earlier, Labour's Sir Keir Starmer said the Queen's speech was a thin address from a government that's out of touch.
This government's failure to grow the economy over a decade, combined with its inertia in the face of spiralling bills, means that we are staring down the barrel of something we haven't seen in decades, a stagflation crisis.
Well, the Prime Minister is saying the government will introduce laws the country needs to overcome the big issues like those affecting families.
We need the legislative firepower to fix the underlying problems in energy supply, in housing, in infrastructure and in skills, which are driving up costs for families across the country. And this Queen's speech takes those issues head on. And above all, we're tackling the economic challenges with the best solution of all, and that's an ever-growing number of high-wage, high-skill jobs, Mr. Speaker. Jobs, jobs, jobs. And we drive up employment by creating the right platform for business to invest.
Well, it was Prince Charles who today delivered the Queen's speech at the state opening of Parliament, Her Majesty missing the traditional ceremony for the first time in almost 60 years, with Buckingham Palace saying it was because of her episodic mobility issues. The event marking the beginning of a new parliamentary session and taking place in the House of Lords. The Foreign Secretary says there's clear and shocking evidence that Russia was behind a series of cyber attacks in the run-up to the invasion of Ukraine. Liz Truss is promising severe consequences for Moscow over what she's describing as the deliberate and malicious incidents. British and US intelligence shows one of those attacks was on a communications company operating in Ukraine called Viasat and taking place an hour before Russia invaded. It was aimed at the Ukrainian military, but it ended up hitting civilians in the country as well as wind farms in Central Europe. And the United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is thousands higher than its official toll of 3,381. That comes after the major port city of Odessa was bombarded overnight by Russian missile strikes. The country's armed forces saying at least one person has been killed and 5 others injured. Ukraine's President Zelensky is warning of global food shortages following the attack. Well, the Prime Minister is going to be travelling to Sweden and Finland tomorrow as the two countries consider joining NATO. They're expected to make a decision about whether to apply before the end of this month. A spokesperson for Boris Johnson said the trip is about the broader security of Europe. And evidence is being presented at the High Court libel battle between Rebecca Vardy and Colin Rooney. Our reporter Ellie Costello has been at the Royal Courts of Justice listening to the trial today. Ellie, what's the latest?
Well, day one of Rooney versus Vardy ended with Rebecca Vardy being cross-examined on the stand by David Sherborne, acting for Colin Rooney. She denied leaking anything to anyone. She also was asked whether she respects other people's privacy. She agreed that she does. The court were then told quotes from an interview that she gave once about having sex with Peter Andre. The quotes were, "Peter is like having sex with a small chipolata, the smallest trouser equipment that I have ever seen. Now, Rebecca Vardy responded saying that this was mudslinging by Miss Rooney's team, and she said the circumstances are completely different to the ones that they are now. She will continue to take the stand tomorrow. The trial is expected to last 7 days.
Ellie Costello, thanks very much indeed. Now, the Duke of Cambridge has given a personal tribute as he unveiled a memorial to those killed in the Manchester Arena bombing. He was accompanied by his wife, the Duchess of Cambridge, to the ceremony at the Glade of Light. 22 people were murdered by a suicide bomber after an Ariana Grande concert nearly 5 years ago. Prince William says it's important to remember those lost in the terror attack.
As someone who lives with his own grief, I also know that what often matters most to the bereaved is that those we have lost are not forgotten. There is comfort in remembering, in acknowledging that, while taken horribly soon, they lived. They changed our lives. They were loved, and they are loved.
Prince William. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
Did you hear that report from the High Court? Right. Yes, I think you did. We might go back to that story a little later on. Wow. Today's Queen's speech was a chance for the government to put forward a fresh legislative programme, big ideas to move them beyond the rows over lockdown and bad local election results. The package had included 38 bills with levelling up, schools and energy security all featuring prominently. Prince Charles stood in for the Queen at the ceremony to officially reopen Parliament after she withdrew because of what were described as mobility problems. Joining me now to discuss this, our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's in Westminster today. Darren, hi to you. What really caught your ear today?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? You say, Colin, 38 draft bills put forward by the government, including lots on levelling up and tackling the inequalities in England and the opportunities the government had argued that Brexit presents. Also, I think what was notable was this bill in terms of tackling what they call kind of guerrilla protests, if you like, the public order bill. They make it a criminal offence, for example, to particularly focus on some key infrastructure issues around Britain, or places, I should say, such as airport, railways, and printing presses, also HS2 included in that, interestingly, Colin, as well. But I think in the end, actually, the most notable thing through all of this was the cost of living crisis. I mean, the government repeatedly during that speech talked about how they want to raise living standards, they want to see the economy grow. And this, you can bet your bottom dollar, is going to be the dominant political issue, not just in the next couple of weeks or indeed during this debate, but also in the months, maybe years to come, too. Inflation potentially going to hit 10% later on this year. The Labour Party want to see the government to go further. They want to see an emergency budget. That is not going to happen. They want to see a windfall tax on energy companies. That may well happen, but not any time soon. The Prime Minister today hinting, though, that there were going to be some extra measures. He said there would be an announcement in the coming days. And I think the government are concerned about this. First of all, they're concerned not to necessarily loosen monetary policy so much that they could make things worse, i.e. they could drive inflation up even higher. But they're also politically concerned that this is having an impact on the popularity. They know, frankly, that they do need to do more, particularly those on the lowest incomes. And you got a sense of that today, didn't you, from the head of Tesco, who was giving interviews this morning, saying that he has seen amongst his own customers real desperation, where people are essentially walking into supermarkets, bringing goods to a checkout and saying, when I get to 20, 30, 40 quid, tell me, because that's all the money I have. And I think that's where the government realise they are going to have to take some measures, again, not months in the future, but clearly relatively soon.
Thanks, Darren. Well, also in the Queen's speech, Prince Charles announced a new government bill to carry out its levelling up agenda. It will contain provisions to force landlords to rent out shops if they're not in use, also revitalise high streets and give people more pride of place in their hometowns. The Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, it's also got measures to give local residents more say in planning approval of developments in their area. We might be talking to the director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, Henry Merrison, technology permitting soon. In the meantime, Scarlett Maguire is here to reflect on how easy or otherwise it is to level up. Scarlett.
I think levelling up is incredibly difficult, actually. I mean, levelling up is not about renting out shops in the high street. Levelling up is about bringing prosperity to places that haven't had it. Levelling up is about having a proper transport system so that people can travel around, so that they don't feel completely isolated. I mean, that's what's so amazing about these northern towns, that are close to conurbations, but they feel isolated. They feel their children have to move away to get proper jobs, or quite often to get any job. I mean, I'm not talking about graduates here. I'm talking about and since the last election, nothing has happened. Nothing has changed. And actually, I don't think that this Queen's speech does. We don't know what's going to happen. I mean, it's true of almost every bill, but we have no idea what actually the government plans to do to level up.
Let's talk about levelling up with somebody whose job it is. The director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership is Henry Merrison, who joins us now. Henry, welcome to you. Levelling up in a paragraph.
And that's always the joy, isn't it? Can you reduce this to the simplicity and what it actually stands for? And what it really does stand for is reducing regional inequality. So where I'm sat down in London, not far from where Darren is in Westminster, life chances are very different than they are for many people in many northern towns. And that's not to say there isn't inequality in London, but the average wage levels are very different. And anyone who watched Panorama last night from Barnsley would absolutely have probably seen the scale and the huge disparities that do exist and that are making young people think about leaving the places they're from. And I do agree with your last panellist. This is about closing those historical divides in our country, about unlocking the potential of the UK, because if we want to compete in the globe and in the modern race in terms of what's going to be the defining things of this century, it's in the fourth industrial revolution, it's in the net zero transition. These are not things you can lead from sitting here in London, Colin. You've got to back up where I normally am day to day in Bradford, in Manchester, in many of the towns, in the Cumbrias, the Carlisles, the Workingtons, the Whitehavens, and cities like Hull and in the Tees Valley. These are the places where those modern dynamic economic opportunities are coming from. It's not just about a service economy anymore. We can't just rely on that to drive our economic model.
Henry, we were debating in the last hour. Part of this bill on levelling up talks about restoring a sense of pride of place in a community. I mean, I'm not setting aside the fact that I'm not sure how you actually, as policymakers, try and make people feel more attached to a place and feel a sense of ownership and loyalty to it. But actually, the places you mentioned, I mean, you know, Bradford, I grew up in Bradford, the people who moved to Bradford to make it the industrial powerhouse of the Victorian era based on wool, I'm not sure how many of them necessarily had a sense of pride of place. That came over time, but initially they moved there in search of jobs. They left the countryside, or in the case of my ancestors, County Mayo in Ireland, to escape economic privations there for economic opportunities in West Yorkshire. They didn't necessarily have to like the place. It was just somewhere there was plenty of lolly to be had.
I think the pride of place stuff is a bit, if I'm honest, of a diversion. And I do fear sometimes that the Treasury is prepared to pay for hanging baskets to tart up town centres because it thinks that's a way of holding on to a few marginal seats, when in fact I think what in northern communities people want is the economic purpose you speak of. And the key point, Colin, is that your studios are in Paddington. I didn't quite get it there this afternoon. They're not in Bradford, and that's the economic challenge. How do you get, whether it's the media, government, and most importantly, those modern commerce opportunities, those modern industrial opportunities to be located in our great northern cities and towns? That is the game we need to be at. And I actually think that many communities do have a strong sense of community that we're talking about here. I use the example of Barnsley. There is no lack of civic pride from people who live in Barnsley. Their concern is exactly the one that was raised by your last guest, which is that never mind kind of being able to get a job in Sheffield and stay living in Barnsley, you can't do that. The transport's pretty rubbish, to be honest, a lot of the time. You can just about manage it if you're a young person. You're certainly not going to be able to get a job in Leeds or Manchester. So that leaves your choice actually moving to London. And until we can extend extend the labour market of the north of England so that a young person from Barnsley can genuinely take up the opportunities available across the north of England, we're not going to solve this problem. We've got plenty, actually, of opportunities to keep young people in the north. The problem is that you almost are pushing people towards that migration down to London the whole time, because it's just not easy enough as a young person to make your way in the world to access the opportunities. And it does get back to trains. We've not mentioned the ubiquitous Northern Powerhouse Rail that isn't going to go to Bradford, the ubiquitous HS2, which isn't going to go to Leeds at the moment in any shape or form until the government does another £100 million review. This is the challenge, which is at the moment, having sat in Barnsley, there isn't a decent public transport connection, even as far as Leeds or Sheffield, between those two cities that genuinely connects Barnsley, never mind a decent line to Birmingham. And that puts businesses off investing, because in Bradford, we have to say to people, if you put your business here, you won't be able to necessarily attract talent from further than Bradford. And there is a lot of talent there, a lot of young people. But if you're a business that needs certain specialist skills, you're not going to find all those people within a very close proximity, unless you're in a sector like retail, which obviously West Yorkshire really does dominate in. For any of those emerging industries, you need to give people access to a bigger field of talent. And today, the rail proposals that were announced really underplayed the need to improve commuter rail. Do you mean that's a real opportunity? If you haven't got much money, the Treasury could at least give mayors like Tracy Braben in West Yorkshire, Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, more powers over the rail network. Andy Burnham's made no secret of the fact he wants control and to run the train station, something that was promised to Greater Manchester literally years ago in previous devolution deals and was never delivered on by this government. That's all stuff that can be relatively easily and cheaply fixed. This isn't the big mega projects. Even that stuff didn't really get played today anywhere near prominently enough. And I think that when Jake Berry was on, I think, another broadcaster earlier, he said what him and his Northern Research Group colleagues wanted was for someone to show them the money. Do you mean they'd had enough debates and discussions about levelling up? He, again, is a minister who'd worked for Theresa May when they were promising more devolution powers so that we could get these Devo deals over the line more quickly. Again, apart from being able to change the name of the Metro Mayor to a sheriff, which was in today's announcement, there's not a lot of meat in there, really, for those who want more powerful mayors and faster mayors.
Changing the
when
name
it's like
sheriff.
education, there's
If we
almost
caught
no
that,
powers.
would have made something of it. Henry Emerson, always really good to talk to you. Appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. A government's energy security bill also announced today. It aims to make the UK reduce its dependence on gas, also seeking to transition the UK into low-carbon energy sources. That's awful English, isn't it? But you know what the government's trying to do. The legislation will also extend the energy price cap to after 2023. Briefly to Matthew Lesh, Head of Public Policy at the Institute for Economic Affairs. Matthew, welcome to you. What caught your ear today?
Look, I mean, generally speaking, there were a few green shoots or a few good elements to this. We saw the fact that the government's putting forward the Brexit Opportunities Bill, which will make it easier to get rid of regulations that are holding back the UK. We're going to get some good news on gene editing, and which could boost Britain's agricultural sector, as well as new data laws that could get rid of some unnecessary regulations online. I'm thinking here those annoying cookie pop-ups that drive everyone mad. But I think outside of that, I really just felt a lack of ambition in this set of proposals. We're really in a time of, in many senses, national crisis. We've got a declining quality of life. People are struggling to heat their homes and feed their families. And yet, of all these 38 bills, very little in there would enable enterprise to more successfully create jobs and become more productive. And in fact, many of the bills, I think, add on burdens onto businesses and make more cumbersome their operations, and are really going to be quite counterproductive, despite all the government's rhetoric about Brexit opportunities. What we're seeing in practice is a lot of attempts to regulate the economy for all sorts of different reasons that could end up backfiring and being burdensome.
Matthew, we're running low on time today, so we're going to cut you short. I hope you don't mind, but appreciate your time as ever. Thanks very much indeed, Matthew Lesh from the IEA. Now, the Queen was absent from the state opening of Parliament today, as you know, with the Prince of Wales standing in her stead. We learned yesterday that she wouldn't be taking part in the pageantry because of mobility problems. This the first time Her Majesty's missed the opening of Parliament in over half a century. Pregnancies forced her absence in 1959 and 1963. Let's turn to the royal commentator and biographer Angela Levin, who's here in the studio. Angela, welcome to you, and thanks for your patience. I know you've been sitting here for a while.
Interesting.
It felt like a big moment today.
It was a huge moment, yes. I think it's a pivotal moment that will change a lot, actually, coming from it. It was very interesting to see Prince William sitting there, looking extremely serious and concentrating on what was going on. And I noticed that Prince Charles, when he came in and sat in what I thought was actually the Queen's chair, but they'd taken that away and left a space, which I think was much better, because I think it would have been very depressing not to see it. But he had a long look at the coronation crown, and you thought, wonder what's going on in his mind, you know. He was really looking at it, whereas Camilla glanced at him very regularly, and as soon as it was finished, she was beaming. I mean, she's there supporting him all the time, I think. But it was very, very interesting how things do carry on.
But evolve too, Angela. Is that not the...
Yes.
That was the lesson I took away from it, that here is this, in the minds of some people, fusty institution governed by archaic and arcane ancient rules, but actually is constantly nimble enough to evolve. And here the message seemed to be, because this is an institution which can't speak its mind, so it has to rely on the visuals and the optics and the symbolism. And here we're saying, here's the future king, not quite where he will be soon, but here's continuity. There's William, another future king. I know there's the Queen Consort. Here's the slimmed-down royal family before your very eyes.
Well, this is what the Queen wanted. I mean, she's obviously been preparing in a way, because otherwise she wouldn't have said that on the first day of her platinum year that she would like Camilla to be Queen Consort, not Princess Consort. And this was done to stop any arguments and discussions of people saying, look, the Queen never got on with her. You know, we don't want her. And that would be going back decades. They've got on very, very well over quite a long time. I also wondered whether we are being prepared to get used to this in the way that the Queen is stepping back very slowly. Some people think it's just the difficult movements for her, but I think she's a woman who knows throughout her career, reign earlier, she's always said, you have to be seen, otherwise people don't believe you're there. And I remember her walking out from somewhere in Africa because she said, where's the press? Where are the journalists? And they said, no, we thought, madam, you know, we wouldn't have anyone. She said, get them, otherwise I'm going. You know, she doesn't want not to be seen. And that won't change. The fact that she's done this with Camilla, I think, leads on to her changing and getting us used to, step by step, that things are going to be very different in a while. And I think it will happen, or the beginning of the conversation will happen after the Jubilee celebrations. She's not going to do anything now. She's struggling and it's going to be very difficult. But she's proving a point that, and I've been looking at all the comments all over the place, and a lot of them saying, well, she's not doing the job, why is she there? That's cruel and nasty.
She's not the chief executive. It's the Holy Office.
Yes, but she's done it for 70 years, so you don't attack her. But there's a feeling that we're missing something. We don't know quite where we are, and it's unstable.
Angela, this transition's been going on for years. We just haven't seen it. So, for instance, Charles has been doing the foreign tours that you mentioned for 10 years. She hasn't done the long-haul stuff for, at least 10 years. It's just now we notice it because... And this in the most acute form, because this is, you know, the Queen's speech. This is the fulcrum. This is the bit where the closest intersection between Parliament, royalty, the constitutional link.
It's her government, and so that's what she has.
It's a big gig.
You know, the government can't move on unless she reads what's going to happen. But obviously, she gave permission to Prince Charles, so it will be okay. But that is so important that the government is stuck unless she reads that, what's going to happen.
Angela, thanks so much for coming in. Scarlett, we'll talk about that later. Maybe we'll give you a chance. Thanks very much indeed. Coming up, fresh from re-election, President Emmanuel Macron has invited the UK to join a new alternative European community. That's our debate. We'll ask, should the UK take him up on the offer? Wow. We'll be joined by the lawyer who forced Parliament to be allowed to vote on the final Brexit deal, Gina Miller, and the leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice. Back in a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. The French President Emmanuel Macron yesterday invited, he said a lot, but part of what he said included this, invited Britain to join a new European political community. During a speech to the European Parliament in Strasbourg, Monsieur Macron said he was in favour of creating a new organisation that would, quote, allow democratic European nations adhering to our core values to find a new space for political cooperation and security. He later said that Britain would be invited to join any such community. President Macron has previously suggested that Europe should form a number of alliances with different levels of integration, making up concentric circles, effectively. Let's debate this. Gina Miller is the campaigner and leader of the True and Fair Party, and Richard Tice is the leader of Reform UK. Welcome to both of you. Gina Miller, we'll begin with you. The idea of a two-speed or three-speed Europe has been discussed for years. I suppose that President Macron feels newly emboldened by his re-election, his majority. There's a still fairly inexperienced Chancellor running Germany. He's stepping up to the plate and coming up with this idea and with some force.
Yes, and as you say, it's not a new idea. He's been talking about this for years, the onion, as I call it, the European onion, where there's lots of different layers. So that's not new. I do think we have to have a grown-up conversation about the future of our relationship with not just France, but with actually all our EU partners. And I would suggest that perhaps it's better if it didn't come from Mr. Macron and from France, but it came from some of our allies, perhaps, the Swedes, or we have what in Europe was called a rotating presidency. So in July, the Czechs are taking the presidency. In January, it'll be the Swedes. So perhaps they're the ones who could broker this, and I think it would be honest brokers rather than France.
I was listening to what Gina Miller said there a moment ago and say, well, we did have that honest grown-up conversation. We had it for quite a long time about our relationship with Brussels, and we got a fairly emphatic answer in the end.
Gina's just mentioned onions. Onions make you cry, Colin, and I have to say this proposal made me cry, because we've just had so much pain and grief trying to leave one European community. The idea of joining another one shortly afterwards, frankly, thanks but no thanks. As Mrs. Thatcher said, no, no, no. It feels to me that it's just another level of bureaucracy, dumbing down our ability to compete. And what troubled me in particular was the language he used. He said that he would generously, possibly somewhat arrogantly, allow European countries that shared the EU's core values to cooperate on energy and transport and infrastructure and movement of people. Well, one of the reasons we left was actually we want to control our own movement of people. So, I thought actually this was rather troubling. I mean, Jean is quite right. Given what Macron's previously said, the last thing this proposal should come is from him. But look, we want to compete. We want to outperform. We don't want to be dumbed down. And so, no, I think thanks but no thanks would be my response.
Yeah. Gina Miller, Richard Tice mentions Margaret Thatcher there. Margaret Thatcher, if memory serves, was attached to the idea that European Union project, it should be wider, not deeper. In other words, expand, take in those accession countries of Eastern Europe as we did, but don't grow any deeper because that spreads the peace and prosperity and security far and wide. Is that principle not undermined by the idea of a two-speed Europe? Because if you are sitting in Warsaw or in Hungary today and you listen to this speech, you think, where do we fit into it?
I think I'm always intrigued by people going to the past, to Mrs. Thatcher, or what might have been said by Churchill. We are living today and the future that we're facing. We have got rather huge issues coming down the track. We can see with climate, not just climate change, but just look at what's happened with threats to our security in Ukraine. And, you've got President Zelensky saying that he wants us to show that we are united. He wants us, in his speech he said last week, to prove that indeed we are Europeans and that life will be brighter and we'll win over death and win over the darkness when we act as one Europe. So, we are in a different place, but I think we have to talk about how do we damage, limitate, because we have left, because there is damage. And, we have seen it in even Mr. Rees-Mogg saying that from July the 1st, there won't be checks because checks and full leaving would actually damage us, be an act of harm, which I think is quite ironic coming from him. But, the thing is, we have to look at how do we move forwards for the threats that are coming down the track that are much bigger than us as individual countries.
Okay.
It's about peace, prosperity, and the planet.
We're almost out of time. Richard Tice, do you think we should be taking up that kind invitation from Mr. Macron to join a new type of pan-European organisation?
No, I don't want to join another political community, but I think Gina's right. There are serious security issues that tragically we've all had a massive wake-up call. But I think the existing security defensive alliance of NATO should be enhanced and properly funded by everybody, including the likes of Germany and others, so that it can carry out that role much more successfully. That's where I would be focusing on to ensure that peace that we all want.
Richard Tice, Gina Miller, thanks both very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Coming up, more on the Queen's speech. First, let's bring you the day's news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The headlines. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has been saying the government isn't doing enough to address the cost of living crisis. MPs are debating the Queen's speech. There are your live pictures coming to us from the House of Commons. David Davis speaking in the chamber at the moment. That speech today setting out the government's legislative agenda. The government saying they're prioritising cost of living, with the Prime Minister acknowledging not everyone can be shielded from rising prices. But Labour's Keir Starmer said the Queen's speech was a thin address from a government that's out of touch.
This government's failure to grow the economy over a decade, combined with its inertia in the face of spiralling bills, means that we are staring down the barrel of something we haven't seen in decades. A stagflation crisis.
This Queen's speech takes those issues head on. Yeah. And above all, we're tackling the economic challenges with the best solution of all, and that's an ever-growing number of high-wage, high-skill jobs, Mr. Speaker. Jobs, jobs, jobs.
Well, it was Prince Charles who today delivered the Queen's speech, and for the very first time for him, Her Majesty missing the state opening of Parliament for the first time in almost 60 years. Buckingham Palace saying it's because of the Queen's episodic mobility issues. In other news, the United Nations is warning the number of civilians killed in Ukraine is thousands higher than the official toll. It comes after the major port city of Odessa was bombarded overnight by Russian missile strikes. Ukraine's president is now warning of a global food crisis following the attack. And here in the UK, Rebecca Vardy repeatedly denied leaking stories about Colin Rooney to the press while being cross-examined at the High Court today. The case is dubbed the Wagatha Christie case, and it centres on a social media post by Mrs Rooney accusing Mrs Vardy of betraying her. The High Court's been told Rebecca Vardy had no choice but to bring a libel claim against Colin Rooney to clear her name. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Colin Brazier's here after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, GB News can exclusively reveal that more than £108 million has been paid out by a compensation scheme for people who were abused in children's homes run by Lambeth Council in South London. It's believed to be one of the largest payouts by a council for sexual abuse in UK history. Alice Porter has been speaking to some of the victims. There is a warning that some of you might find her report upsetting.
My house parent said to me, "Always remember that you're nothing here."
Sandra Fearon was at Shirley Oaks for 5 years in the 1960s and was repeatedly sexually abused.
He told me to lie on this sort of hospital couch and then he raped me. And I was just screaming and sobbing. The pain was just dreadful. He held me down, and that went on for 2 years.
So you've received one of the largest payouts in compensation. What kind of difference has that made to your life?
The compensation actually doesn't take the pain away, but it does help to maybe make my future a bit more secure. And you've been recognised that it happened. We're believed, and that is just so important to me.
Sandra is one of 2,236 people who have applied to the Lambeth redress scheme for compensation. Applicants have to provide evidence of their abuse. Shane Donnelly suffered physical, sexual and racist abuse at Shirley Oaks. He's waited 2 years for compensation.
People have received far less for the same abuse because they're black. Felt almost sort of like victimised all over again. We had to go through psychiatrists, and the psychiatrists used our care files, which was written by our perpetrators. I know people who they got so ill and stressed that they just took the lowest offer.
Survivors are being supported by Raymond Stevenson, who also went to Shirley Oaks. He's been gathering evidence from victims for 7 years and campaigned for them to receive compensation.
Without the evidence we've collated, there wouldn't be any compensation. It's really just proving people were in the cottage, in the home, that the paedophile was working there, and then getting supporting evidence and other victims who were also abused by the same person.
Lambeth Council has apologised for the abuse committed against children at the borough's children's homes. They say their redress scheme is the first of its kind in the country and includes compensation to victims and survivors where race was an aggravating feature in the abuse. Only 6 men have been convicted since the 1990s in connection with abuse in the care homes. For Shane and Sandra, apologies are not enough.
They make a big thing of wanting to change the names of roads because of slavery, but they've discriminated against black survivors who were abused by them as a council.
People have got away with it. This lies up till this day. That's what I'd like to see, a criminal investigation.
Alice Porter, GB News.
Let's go back to the Queen's speech. Lots of different elements to break down, 38 bills in total, lots of different subjects covered. The government's announced a raft of new education measures too in the Queen's speech. There's a new schools bill. The government says it's there to boost regulation of classrooms. It will give the regulator Ofsted powers to crack down on unregistered schools operating illegally in England, as well as introducing compulsory attendance registers. Comes as a surprise. I rather thought they would be already there, wouldn't you? Compulsory registers for who's at school. Also included a new higher education bill that would make student loans worth the equivalent of 4 years of post-18 education available at any stage in someone's lives. But we're going to take a closer look right now into that. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Bill. It places new legal duties on institutions and students' unions to protect free speech. It's seen as part of the government's pledge to take action over campus culture wars. Let's turn to Arif Ahmed, who's a reader of philosophy at Cambridge University. Professor, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it as ever. Are you comfortable with the government getting involved in this area? I suppose we'd wish, wouldn't we, that this is an area that could just be worked out between people on a voluntary basis without being codified by the law and by government.
Yes, it would have been great if that was possible, but all the evidence has shown that it's clearly not possible. I mean, one obvious case was the events at Sussex with Professor Stock just before Christmas, and of course there have been many other cases where events have been cancelled, academics have been attacked, even students have been investigated for saying things that are legal. So clearly the system that you're describing, which may have worked some decades ago, just can't carry on as it is.
Existing laws, is there? I mean, if people are indulging in violent protests, the police have laws to stop violent protests. There's presumably employment laws that can be used when somebody's been sacked unfairly.
I think there's a couple of things that I want to emphasise. So one of them is that as it stands, you would have to go through judicial review, and this involves a high financial risk. And if you're an academic, it may not be possible. There was a case recently, there was an academic who welcomed the bill because she said she could go through the Office for Students for free, whereas she couldn't have afforded judicial review for that. Another thing is that, of course, the bill introduces a duty to promote freedom of speech on institutions, not just to protect them. And I think it is important for key liberal institutions, of which the universities are amongst the most important, that part of what we're teaching students isn't just whatever subject it is you're there to learn. It's to play a full role as an adult in a democratic and pluralistic society. And that means you've got to learn that if there are views you don't like and views that you find disturbing or offensive or shocking, the response to that is not violence, and it's not to shut them down, and it's not to pretend that you can't hear them. It's to argue against them. And they might be right and they might be wrong, but unless that view is accepted, and unless students are taught that, we can't have a functioning democracy.
Where do you draw the line? I mean, it's one thing to say to a student body, let's say at a college at Durham University, where the students don't like the idea of Rod Liddle coming and addressing them. You can see how that might work, but where do you draw the line in the sense that, you've got some institutions saying we're going to apply trigger warnings or look to ban famous works of literature from, Oliver Twist given trigger warnings about class and race and bullying and exploitation, or even 1984, for heaven's sake. What does the state get involved at that level and say, actually, look, it should be just a free-for-all?
Well, I think one important thing to realise about trigger warnings is that they're not intended to stop people from reading material. They're supposed to be a kind of warning so that people can prepare to read the material. Part of the problem with this is that the trigger warnings are applied so broadly to so many things that practically anything with the wrong kinds of themes can get a trigger warning, and that just increases the cost of setting it on your syllabus in the first place. So this is a slightly more creeping area of regulation where you're not actually having universities banning things, but they just raise the costs of doing things, so that if you're an academic and you don't have much time, perhaps you're on a short-term contract, you don't want to antagonize people, it just becomes easier and easier to set material along one kind of direction and not material along another kind. Some of these things, some of these pressures are subtle and difficult, and legislation isn't going to solve this problem by itself. The problem can only really be solved from the bottom up, but the legislation will definitely help with some of the bigger issues, and it could have made a difference to some of the things we've seen in the past.
As you say, legislation will help as far as you're concerned. Are you seeing any evidence amongst the student body of a growing element of students who favour the principles that you hold dear? I mean, we've been on this news channel ventilating the subject, certainly for at least a year while we've been on air. It goes back years. I just wonder whether you're seeing any change in the wind at all.
I will say that my experience in Cambridge has been that most students are actually very tolerant, very liberal-minded. They just want to come to university to learn their degree. They do want to take part in debates, and they're quite happy to engage in discussion on all kinds of things. I just think that there's a minority of students, and more damningly, a minority of academics, who don't seem to realise that that's what a university is for, and they're the ones who want to shut down debate. So the situation we've got at the moment, I think, is that we've got a very vocal minority which has an influence entirely out of proportion to its size, which is tending to dictate the terms of the debate, because many of the administrators in university, and it's they too must take some of the blame, I think, simply prefer an easy life. And often the path of least resistance is to give in to the people who shout the loudest. And insofar as the legislation is going to stiffen the spine of some of the people inside these institutions so that they're actually doing what they're supposed to do, then again, I welcome it.
Arif Ahmed is a reader of philosophy at Cambridge University. Professor, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Scarlett Maguire is alongside me. Scarlett, we've covered a lot of ground on the Queen's speech. There's lots of different bills, every walk of life, from schools in this instance all the way through to higher education institutions. We've focused, as you might expect, on the free speech element of it. It's something this news channel holds dear, as does Professor Ahmed clearly. Should the government be getting involved in this sort of thing?
My worry is that they get involved from one side only. I mean, for instance, in Bristol, there is a professor, or certainly a lecturer, who is very dubious about the Holocaust. Now, should he be allowed free speech? I mean, I just think that when you talk about free speech, you either have it completely open or you have people being able to choose. You talked about Rod Liddle. I mean, actually, the students they paid to go to a supper, and then they discovered Rod Liddle was speaking at it, and then they found him deeply offensive, and some of them walked out. I think you have a right. I mean, when I go to a lecture, if I find that I do remember some years ago, some cricketer was at a dinner and made amazingly racist and sexist jokes, and I just very quietly left. I think I have a right not to have to listen to it.
But you don't then try and get the person who booked said cricketer sacked for a lapse of justice.
I mean, but I think the whole story ends up. I mean, I think one always takes the extremes, and
well, you just did that with the Holocaust link.
Okay, what I was saying is, when I read about this guy, I just thought, so what is it about free speech in university? Is he allowed to say it? Because I think that it's still not against the law here.
It's in some countries, isn't it?
Yeah, it is in Germany. Yeah. But I think that can I quickly say I completely believe in the Holocaust and all of that. But what I'm saying is that actually, it is deeply offensive for people to question the Holocaust when in this country we have a lot of people whose grandparents or parents died in it. And I just think, so how are we going to do it? I think it's a much more difficult issue than people think. And I think the government saying, well, we should have people who... The people we like are the people who agree with us, and we want them to be able to go on. Look, when I was at university, there was a debate about whether Conservative ministers could come and speak, and that was back in the 1970s. It has been forever thus. That's the thing about students, is that students make a lot of noise, and I think to get too upset about it is ridiculous.
Yeah. Back then, only 10% of the population went to universities. Now it's close to 50%, which is one reason I think it matters more. And I'm not making a point about us getting on. I'm just saying that there are more people in play. OK. We'll maybe come back to that. Some emails. The more laws to stop woke protests, the better. They are causing a danger to our society and are not the things they say they are. Who was that email from? Oh, there you go. It's from Seabrook. Do they make crisps? From Tim. The Queen's speech was really disappointing. It didn't have enough in it to help out with the cost of living crisis, which is what really matters to most people. Scarlett Maguire, there might yet be an emergency budget, might there, this year?
I think one hopes so, but they're trying to make it pretty clear that nothing's going to happen before the autumn. I mean, we are in an emergency for an awful lot of families. I mean, when the head of Tesco says, I'm very, very worried, we should all be worried.
Yeah, maybe they could cut the price of some of their items.
Well, maybe we should have a word. Maybe Tesco could make less profit.
We're being slightly unkind to them. But Willie says the plans for levelling up in the speech were really welcome. You shouldn't be allowed to keep shops empty. It's a waste of space and ruins the local area. I'm just not sure you can force people to stay in shops they don't want to trade from. Can you, Willie? On the royal family, this is from Jerry, who says, I think we should all give a little bit more to the royals to pay back a fraction of what they've done for us. I'm not sure they want more cash necessarily. I'm not sure that's the business they're in. Just on that point, can I make a point to you, actually, Scarlett,
yes,
about royal funding? They used to get the civil list. People still talk about the civil list. They now get a cash grant, but it devolves from the estate that the royals gave away a long time ago. This idea that the taxpayer's on the hook for the royal family, for funding lavish lifestyles, it ain't true. We may pick up the tab for security, as we would for any senior figure in public life, but they are effectively self-funding through the Crown estate.
They are also multi-millionaires. I mean, one has to
this
say...
country's full of multi-millionaires.
Yes, but
do naff all for the country.
Yeah, but
London's full of them. London's full of them.
You're right, but you're right that London is full of multimillionaires, but we
do nothing for anybody else.
We do have this slight thing about the royal family. I remember Dickie Arbiter saying, they sort of have to cut their cloth, and you think they don't. I mean, actually, it's very interesting. The Queen is as frugal as my mother was. I mean, I think they both come from Scottish, rather prurient ancestry. But I mean, I do think. I mean, she is not lavish. Unlike her son, who's a bit different.
Oh, no, I disagree with you completely. No, OK. Complete that way. Well, on this one, actually, Jemima says Prince Charles spoke about preventing dangerous and illegal channel crossings in his speech, and I just really hope that the Rwanda plan actually happens. It looks like the usual suspects are involved in trying to subvert it, but it's the ultimate way to sort out our immigration system. Jemima, I agree with you, though your email makes it sound like the Rwanda plan comes from Prince Charles. It doesn't. He's just Scarlett worth... there will be people watching and listening who think, this is from Prince Charles.
No, this is the government.
Is constitutionally an empty vessel through which the government's legislative programme flows.
But I was going to say that considering how many letters Prince Charles has written to governments over the years, I was wondering, Obviously, he was absolutely straight this time, but I was wondering whether he would let a king's speech be quite so much government and him saying,
He will. He'll turn it back. He'll turn it back when he's king. Michelle Dewberry's up next, and we'll give you a flavour of what's coming up. I wonder Michelle, what's caught your eye today?
Thank you. Kind of stay up.
Sitting next to Michelle on left.
Brexit rules, remember, was promised those. Brexit vote, by the way, was more than half a decade ago. What's taken so long? I want to look at that. Also, Rwanda, apparently, it's going to be this week that people find out that that's where they're heading. I'll believe it when I see it, Colin, because, of course, the lawyers are circling. And I found this one really interesting quickly. You know, if you're cruel to an animal, do you think that the sentence that you receive should be dependent on whether or not you've shared that cruelty using social media? Apparently, it will be the case now for new sentencing guidelines. Very quickly, keeping me company tonight, by the way, before I let you go, I've got Lord Moylan, David Curtin and Lambeth Opic.
Michelle, thanks very much indeed. I wonder, Scarlett, is it an aggravating factor if you share photos? I think it probably is, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's boasting, isn't it? I mean, do you remember the footballer who kicked the...
But the animal doesn't know.
No, but I think it shows that you have no remorse. I think it shows you're proud of it.
Yeah, good point, Scarlett. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks for watching. Keep those emails coming in. Michelle Dewberry, I'm sure, might get round to using some of them. Complicated story, the Queen's speech, but a significant day in our royal story as well, with the Queen, with those mobility problems, not taking part in the pageantry and the ceremony, the Prince of Wales and Prince William and Camilla doing so. Stay with us. Jubes & Co is next.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Compared with how we started the day in the south, sunny spells have now appeared and it'll be a fine end to the afternoon, but showers will continue in the north with the low pressure close to northern Scotland and perhaps some more prolonged rain as these weather fronts approach later on Tuesday. Here's the weather front that brought the cloud earlier, and behind it, sunny spells are expected for the rest of the afternoon and into the early evening. But for Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, a different story. Heavy and in places prolonged showers pushing through during Tuesday night. But for Wales and the southwest, here also we'll see some wet weather pushing in after midnight. Now, with all the weather going on, temperatures holding up at 9 to 11 Celsius fairly widely across the UK. So not a chilly start to Wednesday, but it will be a damp start, even a wet start across parts of Wales, southwest England, and then that rain pushing into the Midlands, parts of northern England perhaps, as well as East Anglia, largely avoiding London and the southeast through much of the day, whilst northern England, Scotland, Northern Ireland sees mainly sunny spells and showers. A gusty breeze for many, and it's going to feel much cooler under the rain in the south, 15, 16 Celsius. Could see 19 or 20 in the far southeast, but here we will see the rain eventually peel away during Wednesday evening. And then into the early hours of Thursday, actually fairly widely clear skies. We'll see further showers into the north and west of Scotland, perhaps 1 or 2 for Northern Ireland, but otherwise under the clear skies, a cooler night to come. Temperatures mostly 6 to 9 Celsius as we wake up on Thursday. But Thursday starts off bright, a much more cheerful start to the day compared to Wednesday morning for England and Wales. Sunny spells continue here into the afternoon. 1 or 2 showers for Scotland and Northern Ireland, not as many as we've seen during the last couple of days. And by the weekend, high pressure builds, bringing fine conditions for many.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's big